What's up? Welcome back to Bailey Cakes MTG. Today we're doing another EDH Commander deck tech over one of the commanders from Bloomborough. I know the set after Bloomborough has already came out. I know this is a little late, but I still wanted to go over one of my favorite commanders from the set and talk about different strategies you can employ with this Otter Wizard. Alania Divergent Storm is 3 blue and a red, so it's an Is-It commander, blue-red commander, for a legendary creature, Otter Wizard. Whenever you cast a spell, if it's the first instant spell, the first sorcery spell, or the first Otter spell other than Alania you've cast this turn, you may have target opponent draw a card. If you do, you get to copy the spell. So basically, the first instant, the first sorcery, and the first Otter you cast each turn, you get to copy. So we're thinking about different strategies for this deck. The first strategy is a Spellslinger deck based on copying spells and copying Otters. One of the best Otters you can copy is Coruscation Mage. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if you're able to copy this multiple times with its Offspring ability and with Alania's ability, you can deal 3 or 4 damage for each instant or sorcery you cast, which is crazy. You can play a Prowess deck, which you can copy something like a well, you can't copy a Bria because it's legendary, but it gives other creatures you control have prowess. So every time you cast a non-creature spell, you're gonna give all of your creatures +1/+1, and then you're gonna get multiple triggers of that, and you're gonna be able to swing for massive damage. And then the strategy number 3 we're talking about is just copying big spells. So the first sorcery instant you cast each turn is copied. You can just copy a Time Warp, buy it back from the graveyard, take tons of turns, find a way to kill your opponent. I'm gonna be honest, I like the Spellslinger strategy the most out of these 3 because I think the copying big spell strategy is kind of boring. It's kind of like the obvious thing people think when they see this, but I personally like the Spellslinger strategy, and I think the Prowess is the most cool strategy, but being that it's creature based, it's weak to removal or weak to sweepers. The strategy that I personally would play is the Spellslinger strategy out of these 3. Because I just found the Prowess strategy too weak to removal and the copy big spell strategy a little too boring. But before we go into the individual strategies, I just want to talk about general strategy for this deck and just general tips. So first of all is that you can copy the copy trigger to get multiple instances of the copy trigger. So you can get, instead of copying the instant or sorcery once or the Otter once, you get to copy it twice. So some examples of cards that do that are on the screen right now. Harmonic Prodigy says if an ability or a shaman or a wizard you control triggers, it triggers an additional time. Now your commander is a wizard, so whenever you get to copy the instant or sorcery spell, you will copy it again. This works really well in a Spellslinger strategy, but also if you're copying the big spells like a Time Warp, you can copy it like 3 or 4 times. That's pretty sweet. Roaming Throne does the same thing, except you choose a creature type, and so in this case, you'll either choose Otter or Wizard, and then if a triggered ability of a creature you control the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time, so you get to copy a spell again. And then we also have Twinning Staff. If you copy a spell 1 or more times, instead copy it that many times plus an additional time. So this lets you copy your instant or sorcery spells from Alania twice. So these are all really good cards if you just want to copy your instant or sorceries more than once, which works well in all 3 strategies because Prowess, you get more Prowess triggers and you get more Prowess creatures out because it can copy the Otters. For the Spellslingers, you're getting to cast multiple spells. And then for the big spell copy strategy, you're copying those big spells more than once. Weaknesses of the deck is that your commander is 5 mana, so you need to find ways to cast it quicker. Ruby Medallion is a good way. Red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so to make your commander cost 4 instead of 5. Talisman of Creativity and other mana rocks like Is-It Signet or Soul Ring work well. And then you could also play rituals that just add mana, so you can quickly play out Alania on like turn 2 or turn 3. Before we get into the more specific strategies, we need to find ways to protect our commander because it's going to get removed easily. Something like Swan Song can counter anything that targets our commander or counter a sweeper. Shore Up can give our creature hexproof, and then Lightning Greaves gives it haste and shroud. So these are just ways that you can protect your commander. There are other 1 mana instant or sorcery spells that protect your commander, such as an offer you can't refuse, such as Stubborn Denial, which works well in this deck. So you can play those as well. And then there are cards like Shore Up as well. And then there's, of course, Swiftfoot Boots and Mithril Coat, along with Lightning Greaves. So the first strategy of the deck is Otter Spellslinger. This is the first deck we're going to talk about. So your commander will copy these otters, which will trigger whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. So we already talked about Coruscation Mage. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. If you get 3 or 4 copies of this, because you Offspring, so you get a second copy when you cast it of Offspring, and then it copies it with Alania, so you get 4 copies, or not, yeah, 4 copies of Coruscation Mage in the field, the original plus 3 copies, and dealing 4 damage every time you cast a non-creature spell is going to be huge in a Spellslinger deck. And then Storm Splitter, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can create a token of it. But if you have a copy of Storm Splitter, you're going to be creating 2 tokens every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell that you can damage your opponent with. So these are some of your win cons in an Otter Spellslinger deck. These are the otters that will get copied by your commander, and getting 3 or 4 copies of Coruscation Mage is huge. That'll allow you to quickly end the game, dealing 4 damage to each opponent whenever you cast a non-creature spell is a lot of damage. We have 3 other ways to deal damage to our opponent when we cast a non-creature spell. Fiery Inscription, wherever you cast instant or sorcery spell, deals 2 damage to each opponent. Gutter Snipe does the same thing, except it's a creature, so it's a little bit weaker. But it's a shaman, which matters for some things in this deck, actually. Whenever you cast instant or sorcery spell, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then Electrostatic Field deals 1 damage to each opponent, but it's a 0/4, so it's harder to remove, and it's only 2 mana. As far as dealing damage to our opponent, we have Row Storm Conduit, which whenever you cast or copy instant or sorcery spell, deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker, the weakest of the dealing damage, but it also lets us copy spells. Row Storm Conduit does, so it has a little bit of good thing going for it, a little bit of versatility, along with dealing chip damage to our opponents, but it's just the worst version of this effect. However, being that's a planeswalker, it also does more like Scry, and then lets us copy spells. Talrand is a really strong card in our 99. Whenever you cast instant or sorcery spell, you make a 2/2 with flying. So every time we cast one of our instant or sorcery spells, we make a 2/2. So that's gonna get pretty out of hand. This is weak to sweepers, but if they're able to survive, we're going to be able to do lots of damage to our opponent. And then Sorcerer class, when we ultimate the Sorcerer class to level 3, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instants and sorcery spells you cast this turn. It's going to be a pretty big source of damage and will end the game relatively quickly. However, we have to pay 9 mana to get that effect. However, it does come with some other benefits like drawing us cards and allowing our creatures to tap for mana to cast instant or sorcery. So it's not the weakest card that does this thing because it has other versatility, and it's actually pretty decent. So these are just other win cons in our deck. We need to find ways to reduce the spell costs so we can cast multiple spells per turn. So Stormcatch Mentor, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Ruby Medallion, red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And then Case of the Ransacked Labs, a really cool one. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. However, if you cast 4 more instants and sorceries in 1 turn, you get to solve it. And then its solved version lets you cast an instant sorcery spell and draw a card whenever you cast it. So that's going to be a pretty big card advantage engine whenever you're able to solve this case. But all 3 of these cards reduce the cost of our instants and sorceries, which will allow us to cast multiple per turn, triggering our Talrand multiple times, triggering our Electrostatic Field, our Coruscation Mage multiple times a turn for massive advantage. Stormkiln Artist is also a way to reduce the cost of instants and sorceries. So whenever you cast or copy instant or sorcery, we create a treasure. So it's basically buying us back a mana, so reducing the cast for 1, but we can save that mana to cast a big spell later in the game, and it also gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, so this can be a threat by itself. Haughty Gen, his power is equal to the number of instants and sorceries in our graveyard, so this can also be a threat by itself, and it reduces the it reduces the casting cost of our instants and sorceries. So both Haughty Gen and Stormkiln Artist reduce the cost of our instants and sorcery spells, but also can be threats to win the game by themselves. And then Thunderclap Drake, instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, but you can pay 3 mana, sacrifice it, and when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, you copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone in this game, which hopefully is 1 or 2, and then you can copy an instant or sorcery spell 1 or 2 times. That's pretty sweet. So all these ways reduce the cost, but also give us other versatility as well. Stormcome Artist and Haughty Djinn can be threats, and then Thunderclap Drake can copy a spell. Some of the best spells to copy in the deck are these spells that give us a lot of draw power. So Flame of Anor is one of the best cards in this deck. I really like this card. So you choose one of the 3 abilities. However, if you control a wizard, you can choose 2 instead. And by the way, our commander is a wizard. So if you're able to copy a Flame of Anor with your commander out, you get to choose 2 twice, which is pretty good. You get to have target player draw 2 cards, so you're going to draw 2 cards. You can destroy artifacts, and you can deal 5 damage to target creature, removing threats from the field or removing stacks pieces that are creatures from the field. So if you have your commander out, you get to choose 2 of those, and if you copy this, that's going to be really good. Big Score is another instant that draws 2 and creates 2 treasure tokens. If you have Alania out and you get to copy this, you get to draw 4 and create 4 treasure tokens, basically replacing itself mana-wise and drawing you those cards. That's pretty sweet. And then Pearl of Wisdom, drawing 2 cards for 2 mana. If you're able to copy this, it's also pretty good. Some other draw engines we have Archmage Emeritus, which is one of the best draw engines of our deck. Whenever you cast or copy instant or sorcery, you get to draw a card. We're going to be casting tons of instants and sorceries. We're going to be drawing tons of cards, which gives us more spells to cast, which can trigger Archmage Emeritus again. Pretty sweet. Lock and Load draws a card, then draw a card for each other instance and sorcery you cast this turn. So if we're casting a lot of spells in one turn, Lock and Load can refill our hand and then find us more spells for next turn or to play that turn. You can plot it, so what you can do is play it 1 turn, and then the turn after you can cast it for free, and you can time this so where you can cast tons of spells and then cast your plotted Lock and Load. And then Portent of Calamity, you reveal the top X cards of your library. It's a big X spell, so late in the game you put tons of mana into this. For each card type, you may exile a card of that type from among them. Put the rest in your graveyard. You may cast a spell from among the exile cards without paying its mana cost. So you get to cast a free spell from the top X cards of your library if you exiled 4 more cards this way, and then put the rest of exile cards in your hand. So this is a really good way of finding cards from the top of your deck to cast. We also have rituals in this deck. The reason for the rituals is that they give us mana so that we can just have a big turn. So Mana Geyser, huge one, 5 mana, add red for each tapped land your opponent's control. If your opponent's, this is turn 5, you have 3 opponents, this can add like 10 or 11 mana. Jessica's Will can add, 5 or 6 mana, adding red for each card in target's opponent's hand. But you can also exile the top 3 cards, giving this card gives you mana and draw advantage. And then Saving Song is just a classic, 3 mana, add 5. So all these rituals will add you mana, allowing you to cast so many spells in 1 turn, triggering your Spellslinger abilities, like your Coruscation Mage, like your Talron, like your Archmage Emeritus, like your Stormcome Artist, drawing you cards in the long run, giving you advantage from those. And then something like Jessica's Will gives you mana and it also gives you card advantage as well. And if you're able to copy a ritual, you get tons of mana, which you can use to put into a big X spell. You can use it to cast tons of spells and go off. I'll talk about ways you can rebuy your spells so that you can recast them so you can get more value off of them. So you use your spells already, they're in the graveyard. Past in Flames gives each instant sorcery card in your graveyard flashback until end of turn. So now you can cast all those spells again from your graveyard, and if you discard this, it also has flashback. So if you cast spells and then cast Past in Flames, now you can rebuy your spells, you can trigger all of your Spellslinger abilities. It's pretty sweet. Mizzix's Mastery, you get to exile target card that's instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and you get to copy it for 4 mana. It's a little expensive, but if you pay 8 mana, you get to exile each instant or sorcery in your graveyard and then copy them. So you get to rebuy all of your draw spells, rebuy all of your rituals, rebuy all of your effects. So that's pretty sweet. And these will all trigger your Spellslinger effects like Coruscation Mage or your Talron or all those stuff. I also want to play around with the Storm mechanic because Storm spells will trigger the Storm ability and copy itself for each spell cast before it this turn. Why this is pretty good is that if you're casting a lot of spells in one turn, you get to basically just get this ability so many times. So Elemental Eruption is just a decent card by itself without Storm, making a 4/4 with flying in prowess. However, if you've cast like 2 or 3 spells before this, you get to copy it with Storm, and you get to make like 2 or 3 dragons of flying in prowess, which can be pretty big, especially if you cast lots of spells. Galvanic Relay gives you card advantage. But if you cast this after you've cast 4 or 5 spells, then just go off. And then Ral Crackling Wit is a pretty good planeswalker because whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter, and then it has the ability to make a blue-red otter with prowess that can attack your opponent. It can allow you to draw cards, and then it also allows you to get an emblem of instants and sorcery spells you cast out of Storm, turning all of your rituals into absurd cards, all your draw cards, absurd cards, triggering all of your Spellslinger effects, and yeah, this is pretty sweet. Anyways, these Storm spells are great when you cast a lot of spells. So if you have a spell reducer out, like a Ruby Medallion, or the otter that reduces the spells, and then you cast your draw spells, and then you have some mana left over, you cast a Galvanic Relay to give you more cards, you cast Elemental Eruption, or you cast a Grape Shot. It's all great. So Otter Prowess. Otter Prowess is really cool. Otters that grow your team when you cast spells or give your team prowess. So Bria Riptide Rogue has prowess, and then other creatures you control have prowess. So it gives all your creatures prowess so that whenever you cast a spell, all of your creatures get bigger. Valley Floodcaller, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats, which, you know, otters is the main thing, get +1/+1 until end of turn. You get to untap them. By the way, prowess stack. So if your creature has 2 prowess, so let's say Valley Floodcaller, if you copy Valley Floodcaller, you get +2/+2. Because you have 2 copies, but let's say you have Valley Floodcaller and it has prowess, it'll give itself +1/+1, then give all the otters +1/+1. Or let's say you give Stormcatch Mentor prowess. Let's say you have Stormcatch Mentor has prowess, right? Bria out, other creatures you control have prowess. It'll give the Mentor prowess, meaning that whenever you cast instant sorcery spell, it gives itself +1/+1 twice. So prowess does stack, and then Valley Floodcaller triggers in addition to prowess. So these are 2 instances of prowess creatures we have. We have more. We have Stormcatch Mentor, that instants and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast, and it also has prowess. We have Kitsa Otterball Elite, has prowess and vigilance, so it can attack and block, but also can attack and activate its abilities as well to draw a card, discard a card, or we can pay 2 and tap it to copy an instant or sorcery spell, which is pretty sweet. But you can do this, you can attack with this and then also trigger it. Frolicking Familiar, whenever you cast instant or sorcery spell, gets +1/+1 to end of turn, so this will trigger in addition to prowess. And then also is an instant adventure that allows you to deal 1 damage to any target, so that can be used to trigger prowess as well. We have some more creatures that are prowess creatures. We have Bayran, Voice of Duality, Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy instant sorcery spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So this means that prowess will trigger twice. And so that means every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell, your creatures with prowess are getting +2/+2 instead of +1/+1 if you have Bayran out. Harmonic Prodigy does the same thing. If an ability of a shaman or another wizard triggers, it triggers an additional time. So if your creature has prowess that's a wizard, it'll trigger twice. And by the way, wizard. Not a wizard, but this is the only one that's not a wizard. Wizard. All of the otters in your deck are wizards. So Harmonic Prodigy will trigger them. And then a Bowmore, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and trample until end of turn, giving your prowess creatures trample, allow them to get over blockers, and also giving them +1/+0. In addition to other prowess triggers is pretty strong. Next, we have spells that make creatures. So why we want spells that make creatures are these will trigger prowess, but also not only do they trigger prowess, but also they will create creatures that will grow when you cast more spells. So a great one is Ral Crackling Wit. So Ral Crackling Wit Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put a loyalty counter on, and then you create a 1/1 of prowess. So your casting row will trigger prowess, but it will also um, create something that gets bigger from prowess. Elemental Eruption creates 4/4s of flying and prowess that'll grow bigger whenever you cast more spells. This also will trigger prowess. And the Otterable Antics makes an otter with prowess, and then you can flash it back to make a second one with prowess. There's cheap spells that trigger prowess. These are also in the Spellslinger deck. We have Consider. This surveils one, draw a card. This is a really cheap way to grow your prowess creatures. Pearl of Wisdom, 2 mana, draw 2 cards. And Faithless Looting, draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. If we have flashback cards in the deck, it's basically like drawing an additional card. But another cool thing about the Faithless Looting is that we can flash it back for 3 mana to cast it again from the graveyard to trigger prowess an additional time. These are also in the Spellslinger deck. My favorite card in this whole deck, Flame of Anor. You just get to draw 2 cards, and then if you control a wizard, which all your things are wizards, you get to copy this twice to either deal 5 damage, destroy artifacts, do whatever you want with this. Ponder, 1 mana to look at the top 3 and then choose 1 to put in your hand, basically. And then Gitaxian Probe is a free spell that triggers prowess and draws you a card while looking at your opponent's hand to get some valuable information. One thing is that you want to make sure that you aren't blocked so your creatures can actually get in for damage. The Balmor gives them all trample, which is one good way. Bria Riptide Rogue says whenever you cast another creature spell, a target creature you control can't be blocked this turn, so you can just trigger that a few times to make your guys unblockable. Raise the Palisade says choose a creature type, return all creatures that aren't of the chosen type to its owner's hand, so you can choose wizards, rogues, otters, whatever you have more of. Mainly probably otters and wizards. To return those to your hand, return those to your opponent's hand so you can get in for some damage. And then Demoralize. Each creature can't be blocked this turn except by 2 or more creatures. Just a good way to get in for some extra damage. There's other spells like that too. Final strategy, which is the more basic one. You can copy 1 instant or sorcery spell per turn, so you just copy one of your biggest instant sorceries. This, I think, is the most boring strategy because everybody expects it. But also, it's pretty fun, though, too. But I would recommend playing the strategy at least once or twice, but then once you play it once or twice, everyone's going to hate on your commander. Everyone's going to be like, you better not be copying Time Warp again, and then you're going to be sad because they're going to kill your commander. So if you want to play this Alania deck and not get hated out, playing an Otter strategy or playing a Spellslinger strategy is probably the better way to play it, but I would recommend playing the strategy at least once. You can copy big spells like Brass's Bounty or Karn's Temporal Sundering. Pretty sweet. Make more than 1 copy by copying your commander. So you can make more than 1 copy of each instant sorcery spell per turn by copying your commander of something like Arenis's Vile Duplication or something like Quantum Misalignment or Spark Double. Now, one cool thing about these is if you read this ability, except the token is flying and isn't legendary if the creature's legendary. So you get to copy a legendary creature with this, and you don't have to sacrifice the copy. Same with Quantum Misalignment. The copy isn't legendary, and Spark Double, in interest of additional loyalty counter if it's Planeswalker, and it isn't legendary. So all of these will be able to copy your commander, even though it's legendary, because the copy will not be legendary, allowing you to make multiple copies of your big instance and sorcery spells each turn. Of course, Twinning Staff is going to be in this deck as well. We already talked about that. First thing you want to copy is maybe treasures. Brass's Bounty for each land you control. Create a treasure token. Copy that once or twice. Make tons of treasures. Unexpected Windfall draws you cards, makes treasures, and then Season of the Bold makes tap treasure tokens, and then can exile the top 2 cards to play them. Yeah, it's a decent way to make treasures and stuff. We have card draw in this deck as well, and if you're able to copy something like a Flame of Anor, which I think this has been in each part of the deck, if you're able to copy a Flame of Anor and draw 4 cards and kill 2 things or kill 2 artifacts, that's pretty sweet. Copying a Jeska's Will to add tons of mana, then exile cards and play them again, really sweet. Then exiling something like a Dig Through Time or copying a Dig Through Time, being able to look at the top 7, put 2 into your hand. You can look at the top 7 twice or 3 times. And then find, 6 or 8 cards that you really, really want. Next, we have extra turns. I don't know. I mean, it's obvious. Like, this is the most obvious thing you can do with the commander is play a Time Warp, take an extra turn, then return it to the graveyard. This is the most obvious thing you can do with the commander. I don't like doing it. It's not all that fun, but you could do this. And if you have ways to recur these effects from the graveyard, you can take multiple extra turns every turn. But if you're copying this, you play a Time Warp. You're like, I'll copy my commander, and I'll copy my Twinning Staff. Now I just make 3 extra turns. You can do it. I don't recommend it, but you can do it. One of the other things you can do with this is play these instant win cards and copy them. So you can play what you do is you have these treasure token makers, like a Brass's Bounty or Unexpected Windfall. You make tons of treasures, right? And now you make tons of treasures of those, and you can put those all into X and then copy this big X spell to wipe out the table. Giant's Immolating Inferno deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. Who are the 3 targets? Your 3 opponents. You'll be like, alright, X equals 10, deal 10 to you, deal 10 to you, deal 10 to you. Copy it from Alania, it deals 10 to each of you again. Copy it from the other copy of Alania, or copy it from Twinning Staff, it deals 10 to each of you again. That's the way to win the game. Comet Storm is the same way, except you have to pay 1 extra for each copy that you want to make of this. How it works is you deal X damage to 1 target, but if you pay the multi-kicker, you deal the same thing, except you have to pay 2 extra mana. You'd be like, I'll deal 10 to you, 10 to you, 10 to you. All copies from Alania, deal 10 to you, deal 10 to you, deal 10 to you. So yeah. So these are kind of fun. Anyways, we talked about 3 strategies of Alania. The deck lists are in the description below. If you want to see gameplay of this deck, let me know. Anyways, thank you very much for watching this video. We learned about Otter Spellslinger, we learned about Otter Prowess, and we learned about copying big spells. Anyways, thank you very much for watching the video. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.